There is a state of being that very few individuals ever achieve. It is not the cold detachment of indifference. It is not the practiced suppression of someone who has simply learned to swallow their rage. It is something far more profound, far more liberating, and far more rare. I am speaking of genuine psychological immunity, the capacity to stand before any provocation, any insult, any betrayal, and feel not the familiar surge of anger, but something else entirely, something that resembles freedom. If you have found yourself here, listening to these words, I suspect you know the exhaustion of reactivity. You know what it means to be hijacked by your own emotions, to say things you later regret, to lie awake replaying conversations, crafting the response you wish you had delivered, to feel your body tense the moment certain individuals enter a room. Perhaps you have been told you are too sensitive. Perhaps you have been told to simply let things go, as if releasing a lifetime of conditioned reactivity were as simple as opening your hand. These well-meaning suggestions miss the fundamental truth of what anger actually is and why it has such power over the human psyche. What I am about to share with you is not a technique for managing anger. It is not a breathing exercise or a cognitive reframe, though these have their place. What I will reveal to you are 7 psychological shifts that, once genuinely integrated, make reactive anger virtually impossible. Not because you have learned to suppress it, but because the very mechanism that generates it has been dissolved. This is the work of a lifetime condensed into understanding. Listen carefully. The first shift requires a complete reorientation toward anger itself. Most individuals approach their anger as a problem to be solved, an enemy to be defeated, a shameful weakness to be hidden. This adversarial relationship with one's own emotional life is precisely what perpetuates the cycle. Here is what I discovered after decades of analytical work. Anger is never the primary emotion. It is always a secondary response, a protective mechanism that arises to shield you from something far more vulnerable beneath it. When someone criticizes you and you feel anger surge through your body, the anger is not the wound. The anger is the bandage your psyche applies to the wound. Beneath that anger, if you had the courage to look, you would find hurt, you would find fear, you would find the small, vulnerable part of you that believed the criticism might be true. I call this the guardian function of anger. Your psyche deploys anger because anger feels powerful, and whatever lies beneath it feels unbearably weak. The man who rages when his competence is questioned does so because somewhere within him lives a terrified child who believes he is fundamentally inadequate. The anger is not the problem. The anger is pointing directly at the problem, if only he would follow where it leads. The first shift then is this. The next time anger arises, do not fight it, do not express it, do not suppress it. Instead, ask it a single question. What are you protecting? The answer will always reveal something you did not wish to see, and in that seeing lies the beginning of liberation. The second shift is perhaps the most confronting, and it is the one most people resist with every fiber of their being. It is also the most transformative. Here is the uncomfortable truth I must share with you. The people who bother you most are showing you yourself. I have termed this phenomenon shadow projection, and it operates with mathematical precision in every human interaction. Whatever quality you have rejected in yourself, whatever trait you have deemed unacceptable and cast into the darkness of your unconscious, you will inevitably encounter in others, and when you do, you will react with an intensity that far exceeds the situation. Consider this carefully. Why does one person's arrogance infuriate you while another person remains unmoved by the same behavior? Why does a particular tone of voice from your colleague trigger disproportionate rage while your friend barely notices it? The external stimulus is identical. The reaction is vastly different. The difference lies not in the external world but in the internal landscape of each observer. You react intensely to what has been suppressed intensely. The qualities that disturb you most in others are the precise qualities you have forbidden in yourself. The arrogant colleague bothers you because somewhere within you lives an arrogance you have never permitted yourself to express. The controlling partner enrages you because you have disowned your own desire for control. The needy friend exhausts you because your own neediness has been locked away, unfed and desperate. This is not a comfortable realization, but once you truly grasp it, something remarkable happens. The other person loses their power over you, not because they have changed, but because you recognize that your reaction belongs to you and has always belonged to you. They were merely the screen upon which you projected your own unfinished business. The second shift, then, is to ask a different question when someone bothers you. Not what is wrong with them, but what in me is being shown to me right now. The third shift addresses one of the most insidious sources of interpersonal anger, the unspoken contracts we create without the other person's knowledge or consent. You have done this. We all have. You have constructed elaborate expectations of how others should behave, how they should speak to you, how they should recognize your needs and respond to your unvoiced requests. You have written these contracts entirely in your own mind, never showed them to the other party, and then become furious when they fail to honor terms they never agreed to. I should not have to ask for appreciation. They should know how much I have sacrificed. A real friend would have called to check on me. If they truly loved me, they would understand what I need without me having to explain. These invisible contracts are the source of immeasurable suffering, and here is what I must tell you. They are not agreements, they are fantasies. And you have been punishing real people for failing to live up to imaginary obligations. The person who did not thank you appropriately never signed a contract promising to thank you in the specific manner you required. The friend who forgot your difficulty never agreed to monitor your emotional state with the vigilance you expected. The partner who failed to read your mind never possessed the telepathic abilities your contract assumed. When you release these unspoken expectations, something extraordinary occurs. People begin to appear as they actually are, rather than as constant disappointments measured against impossible standards. Their behavior becomes simply their behavior, not a personal offense against the contract they never signed. The third shift is this. Examine every frustration you have with another person and ask honestly, did they actually agree to this, or did I simply decide they should know? The answer will liberate you from countless imaginary betrayals. The fourth shift requires you to recognize that the part of you that gets angry is not the entirety of who you are. This may seem obvious when stated plainly, but in the moment of provocation, this truth vanishes completely. When someone insults you and anger floods your system, there is a total identification that occurs. You become the anger becomes you. There is no separation, no witnessing presence, no part of you that stands apart and observes. You are fully merged with the reactive state. What I call the wounded self is the collection of old injuries, unprocessed pain, childhood adaptations, and protective mechanisms that constitute your reactivity. This wounded self has a trigger system as precise as any alarm. Certain words activated, certain tones activated, certain facial expressions activated, and when activated, it commandeers your entire being. But this wounded self is not your whole self. It is a part, often a young part, frozen in time at the moment of original injury, perpetually defending against threats that may no longer exist. The man who explodes when disrespected is not responding to the present moment. He is responding to every moment he was ever made to feel small, all compressed into this single interaction. The fourth shift is the cultivation of what I term the witnessing self. This is the part of you that can observe anger arising without becoming anger. It is the consciousness that notices the heat in your chest, the tension in your jaw, the rapid thoughts, and recognizes them as phenomena occurring within you rather than definitions of who you are. This is not dissociation. This is not suppression. This is the expansion of identity beyond the wounded part to include the wholeness that was always present beneath the reactions. From this expanded position, anger can be felt fully without being acted upon blindly. The wounded self can be honored without being handed the controls. The fifth shift confronts directly the hidden agenda beneath most anger. You want them to change. Observe this honestly in yourself. When someone's behavior provokes your anger, there is almost always an unspoken demand embedded within it. They should not be this way. They must stop doing this. If I express sufficient displeasure, they will finally understand and transform. This is the great illusion that fuels interpersonal resentment, and I must tell you plainly that it is a complete fiction. In over 60 years of psychological work, I have never once observed a human being transform because someone else was angry at them. I have observed compliance born of fear. I have observed temporary modification born of guilt. I have observed surface changes that dissolve the moment pressure is removed. But genuine transformation, never. People change when they are ready to change through their own internal process, in their own time, for their own reasons. Your anger at them, no matter how justified it may feel, has precisely zero power to accelerate this process. More often, it delays it. Resistance strengthens when attacked. Defenses fortify when assaulted. The fifth shift is the complete abandonment of the project of changing others through your emotional reactions. This is not passivity. This is not acceptance of abuse. This is the recognition that your anger was never an effective tool for transformation in the first place, and releasing it frees you to choose responses that might actually influence the situation. You may still set boundaries, you may still make requests, you may still remove yourself from harmful situations, but you will do so from clarity rather than reactivity, from choice rather than compulsion. And paradoxically, this is far more likely to create change than all the anger you have ever expressed. The sixth shift is preparatory in nature, and it addresses the truth that most reactive episodes occur because you entered the interaction already destabilized. Consider your state of being when you encounter someone who typically provokes you. Are you centered, grounded, secure in your own value? Or are you already slightly off balance, already somewhat defended, already unconsciously bracing for the impact you anticipate? Most people live in a state of perpetual, low-level reactivity. They move through their days with their psychological defenses partially activated, their nervous system slightly dysregulated, their sense of self subtly dependent on external feedback. In this state, it takes very little to trigger a full response. The threshold is already low. What I call locating your center is the practice of establishing yourself firmly in your own being before any interaction that might challenge you. This is not a matter of affirmations or positive thinking. It is a matter of genuine self-contact. It is the felt sense of your own existence, independent of what anyone else thinks, says, or does. When you are truly centered, provocations still occur, but they encounter something different. They encounter a self that is not contingent upon their good opinion. They encounter an identity that does not require their validation to feel complete. From this position, their words are simply words. Their behavior is simply behavior. It may be unpleasant. It may require response. But it does not threaten your fundamental stability because your fundamental stability is not in their hands. The sixth shift is the commitment to center yourself before rather than attempting to recover yourself after. This is where the real work occurs, in the moments before interaction, in the cultivation of a stable inner ground from which all encounters proceed. The seventh and final shift requires confrontation with the deepest truth of human existence, one that, fully realized, dissolves not only anger, but the entire structure of psychological suffering. Everyone who has ever bothered you will die. You will die. The situations that currently consume your emotional energy will pass into the same void that has swallowed every conflict, every grievance, every righteous fury that has ever burned in any human heart. This is not morbid reflection. This is the most clarifying perspective available to a human being. When you are consumed by anger at someone, you are treating this moment as though it were permanent, as though this interaction were of ultimate significance, as though your reactive state were a reasonable response to the magnitude of what is occurring. But nothing that is occurring is permanent. Nothing that is occurring is of ultimate significance. And in the light of mortality, the question becomes not how do I win this conflict, but is this how I wish to spend my irreplaceable moments of conscious existence? I am not suggesting that nothing matters. I am suggesting that what matters is not what you think. The content of the conflict rarely matters. How you inhabit your own being during the conflict matters immensely. The words they said will be forgotten. The way you abandoned yourself to rage or maintained your center despite provocation will echo through the remainder of your life. The seventh shift is the ongoing remembrance that you are a temporal. I phenomenon having a temporary experience with another temporary phenomenon. From this perspective, anger does not disappear because you have suppressed it. It loses its foundation because you have seen clearly that there is nothing permanent enough to justify it. Before I conclude, I must offer a caution that may save you from a dangerous detour. There are those who will hear these words and use them to construct a new form of superiority. They will tell themselves they are beyond anger, that they have transcended reactivity, that others are still trapped while they are free. This is not liberation. This is spiritual bypassing dressed in psychological language. If you find yourself feeling superior to those who still get angry, you have not integrated these shifts. You have merely added another layer to your ego. The truly integrated individual does not look down upon the reactive. They recognize their own former reactivity with compassion. They understand that everyone is doing the best they can with the level of consciousness they currently possess. Furthermore, these shifts do not mean you will never feel the energy that might become anger. You will feel it. The difference is that you will feel it as energy, as information, as aliveness moving through you, rather than as a compulsion that must be expressed destructively. The energy is not the problem. Unconscious identification with the energy is the problem. True psychological immunity is not cold. It is not detached. It is warm with understanding and alive with presence. It allows you to feel deeply without being controlled by what you feel. It permits you to engage fully without losing yourself in the engagement. Let me leave you with this understanding. The goal is not to become a person who never feels. The goal is to become a person who is no longer at the mercy of what they feel. There is an immense difference. One is deadness, the other is mastery. The 7 shifts I have shared with you are not techniques to be applied externally. They are realizations to be lived internally. Each one, fully absorbed, removes another layer of the mechanism that generates reactive anger. Together they dissolve the very structure that made you vulnerable to being bothered in the first place. You will still have preferences, you will still have responses, you will still take action when action is required, but you will do so from wholeness rather than from wounding, from clarity rather than from compulsion, from the centered self rather than from the scattered fragments of old injuries. This is what I have called psychological sovereignty, the complete ownership of your internal state regardless of external circumstances. It is not something granted to you by others behaving better. It is something you claim for yourself by doing the inner work that frees you from dependence on their behavior. And perhaps this is why these words have found you today. Perhaps you have reached the point where you are ready to stop waiting for the world to stop bothering you and start becoming someone who cannot be bothered. The world will not change. The provocations will continue. The difficult people will remain difficult. But you can become something new, something free, something whole, and that changes everything.